You got some music like Raj.
Just coming up. We are live, gentlemen. Hello and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm joined by Steve, doesn't need any introductions, and likewise Paul Williams. And we're hopefully going to be talking a little bit about the meeting that we had with the police yesterday and the changes, the future changes that are going to be occurring at Speaker's Corner.
Excellent.
Who wants to start? Steve, you took extensive notes. What would you like to talk about first?
Well, let's just talk about the details. So I think I counted that there were 18 of us, and we had representatives from the police and from the Royal Parks. And we all sort of went round the table to begin with and just introduce ourselves and say how long we've been going. And I think the longest server was over 60 years. So I don't know if we're going to name names of who was there.
I don't
or
see
just
why
keep it
not.
anonymous.
No, I don't see
Why
why
not?
we can't.
Okay, so I think Robert the longest server. So that's Robert, the old guy who's a bit of an EU fan, often has the EU flag draped around his shoulders. I think he was the longest server of 60 years. And then we had Tom Tickell, who I think was around 50 years that he's been going there. So we had a lot of old timers around the table, and then sort of kind of we had right up to date people that have just been going for the last month or two, and a fairly good range of people from Christians to Muslims to atheists to men's rights activists to, I don't know whether, does Kyle consider himself a Marxist? Not quite sure what label he should be given. So yeah, we had a good range, and then I think Steve Barnes, obviously the police guy who's the sort of lead officer for Speaker's Corner, I kind of confirmed that it was a point in history. It was the first time that there'd ever been such a meeting with sort of a crowd of regulars from the corner and the police and then the park. So it was a moment in history, I guess.
It was indeed. So there was a few people that didn't show up.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, Steve asked me to sort of coordinate it and try and get as bigger and as good a mix of people. And I think I totted up that 28 people in total were invited. So I guess we got 18 out of 28, which maybe isn't too bad a response. But I think even though including Paul, we had a handful of Muslims there. Unfortunately, there were a few Muslims that couldn't make it for whatever reason. So Mohammed Hijab, Ali Dawa, Shamsi,
Mansur, Hashim,
and yes, and Mansur. Unfortunately, they obviously couldn't make it on the time.
No,
but just mentioning, I know it was something that we sort of talked about at the very end of the meeting, but I think we all agreed that we felt it was a useful meeting, and it would be useful to have these periodically. I think quarterly was suggested, and I think we all felt that if we do that, it would be really good to encourage those guys, if they possibly can, to get along, just so their voices can be heard as well.
Indeed. I agree. It was a good meeting. Although I was a little shocked because, of course, I'd been told beforehand of the changes that were going to be made, and none of those changes were going to be made. So where should we begin?
Well, seeing as you've said that, do you want to share what your expectations were that didn't come to pass?
Yes, I was told that they were going to outright ban cameras, and I have to say, I think to a certain degree, I agree with that. People do act out on camera, and they have to save face and that kind of thing. So I thought, well, maybe that's sensible. I didn't particularly like it. I think it's a bit draconian, but I thought it seems reasonably sensible to do that kind of thing. But of course, they're not banning cameras. In fact, they were actually quite promoting cameras in a way, promoting Leon and his camera work.
Yeah. I mean, I'm to be honest, it's a subject that I don't necessarily have a firm view on, which is quite unusual for me. But to be honest, I could be persuaded either way. I mean, I think it would have been pragmatically very difficult to actually enforce. But I can see that it does spread the word, and it allows many more people to watch what goes on at Speaker's Corner than otherwise could. And people that have individual messages, it allows them to get their messages out much more broadly. But then we know the downside of it is all the absolute nonsense that's been going on, particularly recently, of sort of personal attacks and fights and arguments being whipped up throughout the week. So yeah, I'm not sure which side of the fence I'd come down on if it was ultimately my call, but anyway, they've told us that there's not going to be a ban. But I think what the police did say is that in the same way that they're saying they're going to police the actual physical corner in terms of issuing notices and behaviour contracts and ultimately exclusions, they will also encompass behaviour online. So therefore, if people are making threats and if nonsense is going online on social media, on channels, etc., then the culprits would equally get warnings and ultimately could be excluded from the corner if they are seen to misuse it. Which again is going to be a bit of a challenge, I would have thought, for them to actually physically do. I'm not sure how they're going to monitor that or how they would enforce that.
Well, I've got my views on that, but I'd like to bring Paul in and ask him what he thinks of the cameras at the corner.
I think they're a mixed blessing. It's a bit like the internet or social media itself. It can be a great boon for all sorts of wonderful reasons, contact, communication, and so on, but a very negative side as well. So I think it's a mixed blessing. It'd be impossible to enforce. I agree with Steve. Cameras are part of our society, are part of life in London. How do you artificially, clamp down on that? You need a big police force that's constantly stopping newcomers, and so that's a non-starter. But the negative side, as Steve says, it helps to aggravate and incite people outside of the park, and who then come along and join the fun with tan, and so it has quite a negative consequence as well. So I think it's here to stay. The cameras. I don't like the way that people sort of perform to them rather than actually have authentic discourse and discussions. I just don't see we can put the genie back in the bottle. I think we're lumbered with it, as we are with the internet and everything else. It's a mixed blessing.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, my issue has always been the sort of tit for tat personal attacks that go on pretty much all online and not on a Sunday. And I think Steve's raised the point that what happens is we create lots of negative, a negative vibe outside, and that gets brought back on the following Sunday. So this whole thing just continues on, this vicious cycle of like tit for tat. And I was encouraged that Steve is, going to do something about that.
Mm. And I think it was Bob the Builder that made the point that actually having the cameras there and having the film evidence there can actually be useful in terms of having evidence of the moments when violence and intimidation and scenarios like that break out. Having cameras there gives us harder evidence of that crap that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been concerned about the in the evening as well, like how there's no policing there, and the cameras are useful for that. So I thought, well, if they're not going to police the evenings and then they're going to ban the cameras, then that's a time when you're going to see the most violence or the most the most threats and bad behaviour. I'm not going to talk about it on here, but there's definitely an incident that I'm aware of that was appalling, and it wasn't anything to do with Muslims or Christians or atheists. So it was a completely independent thing, and it wasn't good at all. So
Was
yeah,
that caught on video?
it was the start of it was, but the person who was filming was shoved over, probably because he had a camera, and the police were called. Yeah, so again, no evidence past the initial sort of shove. But yeah, I mean that's not. I mean, I saw an incident one evening where a chap was saying something. He thought it was safe to say it. It was a pretty nasty remark. Again, nothing to do with religion. Made a racial remark. and set everyone off. He got punched. No police, no cameras. Well, there was cameras, but no police, no sort of official footage. I don't know. I mean, there was so many people there. It could have escalated to a punch up with 20 people. There was a lot of toing and throwing and shoving, and yeah, not good at all, really.
Yeah. But I think, I can't remember whether it was Steve or whether it was the lady from the Royal Parks that, did point out that, again, one of the regulations that governs the park does dictate that filming for commercial purposes is not allowed. And not just for commercial purposes, but any body filming there for purposes connected with that body, again, it is not allowed without written permission. But it's just one of those things that it's just impossible to enforce in the modern world, because with the modern world, when anyone with a phone can have a YouTube channel, can have a monetized YouTube channel, I guess that rule wasn't really written to fit the modern world of telephones and social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I'd heard a lot of people saying beforehand that all is filming going to be banned, but to be honest, I think it was just a bit of a whipped up rumor that was going around.
I can't see how it can be banned. It's there by statute, by act of parliament. It's not in the gift of the police just to ban it. I mean, it would take the House of Commons to intervene, literally.
Well, precisely, yeah. Can I just take it back, James, to the invites and who was invited and who wasn't? Because I saw some comments were made in the chat.
Oh yeah, sure.
You
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So, as I said, Steve Barnes asked me to get the invites out. He basically gave me two parameters to that. One was, as I said earlier, to make sure I get a full range of people, to ensure that all the main groups of people that go were asked and had opportunity to come. And then the second proviso he gave me was that the room can take 20 people. So don't invite too many more than 20 because we won't fit them in. So obviously that's not a vast number. In the end, we had 18 people there and 28 people were invited, so good job they didn't all turn up, actually. So therefore, obviously, I could not invite everyone. That was just never going to happen. But I genuinely feel, and I sent it to Steve Barnes, so he could see what I was doing, that the list of people that were invited was a pretty decent reflection of the general ranges of people that go there. Now, I didn't invite a flat earther. I didn't invite a vegan. Maybe I should have and invited less of some of the other groups. But at the end of the day, certainly all the major faiths and non-faiths were invited and represented. So yeah, sorry if someone didn't make it onto my list, but I had some limitations to how many people I could invite.
Yeah, I think it would have been nice if some more Muslims to join Paul, because he was a little bit outnumbered at certain points when we were got a little heated.
Nazem turned up and Syed turned up. They would have been on time, but for problems with traffic. So there were three of us, but some of the big guns weren't there, like Adnan and Mansour and Hashim.
Exactly, I think it might have been a different dynamic.
I know these guys. They would have turned up. Issues why they couldn't arrive. So next time they'll be there.
Yeah, we're going to have another one, aren't we? Well, they were saying perhaps once a quarter they'll have a meeting. So it moved on. Steve was, I mean, the general sort of gist of it is that the police will be struggling to to have representation there. They certainly won't be having representation there in the evenings, and they're going to deal with things in a way that some of us are not necessarily in agreement with. Steve, did you want to sort of come in on that one?
Yeah, and I mean, in many other conversations that I've had with Steve Barnes, we all know from just reading in the media that the police in general or feel they're really under-resourced at the moment, and the team that police the Royal Parks is a very, very small team. And when we've had major events or major moments at Speaker's Corner, they're ferrying in police from other teams or from the territorial support group when there's serious concern about public disorder. So it doesn't feel right, but it's where we are today, that they don't have enough resources. And I know, Steve responded to comment. A number of us have made comments in the past when we've perceived that the victim of a violent mob seems to be the individual that the police deal with. So, we know there have been numerous examples of that, including Tan and including Raj and others. And it always very much seems that the police come and kind of shepherd that individual out to leave the mob that were getting very intimidatory and very threatening. Um, it's awful, but the reality we're in seems to be that is more than anything is a resource issue, that they simply do not have the resources to deal with a baying mob of 20, 30, 50, however many people. And it's much simpler if you've got only a small number of resources, a small number of boots on the ground, that you just get the individual that's in the middle of it out of the way into safety. Be that push them onto the bus like Steve did with Tan on that one occasion, or just get them away from the corner. And that's, to me, that seems wrong on many fronts. But if they simply can't get the resources there to deal with the bigger numbers, then I suppose, what other options do they have?
I mean, I think we'll sort of come and talk about Tan next, but one of the worst things I saw was Callum getting shoved around
Mm-hmm.
after the bus incident, and there was no one there to defend him. They were getting physical with him, pushing him around. Yeah, it's not good.
In fact, I almost, well, no, not almost, I did get a clear impression from Steve of discouragement from phoning the police. I mean, it probably might be worth sharing with people, he gave, quite a shocking anecdote of one day when he was on duty in the Serpentine Cafe near the Serpentine Lake. And he was dealing with, I think, an elderly American tourist who'd had her bag stolen. I can't quite remember the sequence of events, but basically he was called to Speaker's Corner because someone called up because there was some squabble going on, and that turned out to be very much sort of handbags at dawn and nothing of huge significance. And basically because he was pulled away from this individual, you might want to correct me on the series of events, but basically she ended up losing her handbag, losing her medication, losing her passport. She had to go back to America to get the correct medication, and she died 2 weeks later. And he was kind of presenting this anecdote as, we're called to Speaker's Corner for nonsense, and it takes us away from the more serious, significant work that we should be doing. Therefore, don't call us when someone's having handbags at dawn and having a bit of a squabble, which certainly, well, maybe it is in the modern era, but generally that's not what you expect to hear from the police. If you're concerned of your safety, don't call the police because you're wasting their time. I'm
Yeah,
sure he'd deny that's what he was saying, but
yeah, it was a sad story. I mean, I don't want to get too divisive on this, and I think me and Paul are probably on the same team with regards to Tan. But I mean, just perhaps you'd briefly like to talk about that. How, I mean, what's your feeling, Steve, about Tan being sort of left to his own devices, saying these things that are offensive and inciting? What's your feeling on it?
well, I don't know if you actually listened carefully to the precise words that Steve Barnes, Police Constable Steve Barnes, said on this subject, and I was actually a little surprised at his candour on this subject, but it was exactly as I see it, and I completely agreed with him. And I don't think I misheard him or misinterpreted him, but he actually said the words, in many ways, Tan represented exactly what Speaker's Corner should be about. It should be about completely unfettered, unlimited freedom of speech. It should be about people pushing the boundaries. It should be about people saying things that other people may find offensive. And clearly, that's precisely what Tan did. Again, Steve Barnes gave the anecdote that I can't remember whether it was the final speech that Tan gave. It might be in the penultimate one, and I observed this actually. Steve Barnes, from the start to the finish of Tan's speech, was stood just a few feet to the side. He was closely observing and listening to everything that Tan said, and he was closely watching and observing the crowd. And what he fed back yesterday was that crowd remained calm. That crowd, there were no signs of violent reaction or of significant reaction. And Steve also said, and that this was one of the moments when Tan was using the N-word, that Steve, in the thick of it, actually sort of asked some black members of that audience what they thought and were they offended. And what Steve told us yesterday is their precise response was no, because I heard the context in which he used that word. And they were absolutely fine. And I remember Steve telling me at the time he was absolutely confident that Tan had not breached any law on that occasion, or I believe potentially on any occasions physically in Speaker's Corner. So clearly he created challenges. He created challenges for lots of people, not least the police. However, in so many ways, what Tan did represents what free speech is about. And maybe we want to cover it later, but the whole legislation that covers free speech and offence, in particular the one legal case which I forget what it was called. It was the DPP versus.
Yes, it was.
So, do we want to talk about that now? Because I thought
Redmond versus Bates, I think.
Redmond Bates versus the DPP is the actual case.
Yeah.
And I've got the quotes of it because Steve brought that up last night, and I think it is highly relevant to Speaker's Corner in general, but highly relevant to discussions around Tan.
Can we come back to that just a second, Steve?
Should we come back to that later?
Yeah. No, well, I'll let you go through it, but I want to bring Paul in because he's been quite quiet there. Paul, what's your feelings on Tan? He may have had to go on because he's muted at the moment.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think he's muted. He may be on. He's on call, so yeah. We'll let him come back. Yeah, my feeling is that knowing that the police can't, handle the situation, I felt it was dangerous. I didn't see anything good in what Tan was doing. I appreciate your supporting free speech and all the rest of it. I thought it was, insightful and dangerous. And I appreciate that people shouldn't take offence, but the reality is that they do. I like you, with what Steve was saying. I spoke to Maku. One of the senior guys in gang, and he didn't seem to give a hoot to what Tan was saying. I said he's used the M-word umpteen times. He said, I don't care. So he wasn't so fussed about it either. But of course, it did lead to a hell of a lot of cops showing up the week after, and possibly attracted unsavoury characters. Now, the thing I want to say, Steve, is that one of the things we always say about Speaker's Corner and free speech is that people are going to show up in Nazi uniforms and spit their bile. And the great thing is we can ridicule them and take them down a peg. And prove that they're talking nonsense. And that's all well and good. But when Tan was, doing his thing, there wasn't anyone ridiculing. I mean, it was nonsense. I mean, his rhetoric.
But then that's
full of crazy nonsense.
Then that's not Tan's guilt. That's whoever should have been challenging him's guilt.
I know you weren't present. I'm fairly certain you weren't present at the two that I saw. I stood next to, or just behind Tan at the first speech, which was about zombies, and I lost track. The second speech was the N-word speech, and I wasn't present for most of that. I heard a little bit of it because I was too far at the back. But there was some stuff about India and all sorts of things. I mean, no one challenged him. I guess maybe they were a bit shocked by it, but I felt that, like with Tan, there needed to be some sort of solidarity in all different camps to say, actually, we don't approve of that language. What do you think of that?
I agree with it. I mean, you're kind of saying, therefore, the mob isn't the right word, but the group should be able to enforce and dictate and decide what can be said and what can't be said.
No, not what can be said.
Surely that's wrong.
No, but it's the same thing that you do, isn't it? You heckle the people you disagree with.
Yes, but in no way saying they shouldn't be there saying what they're saying.
No, I'm not saying they shouldn't be there. I'm saying first of all we should be heckling them, right? When they're if the guy shows up in the Nazi uniform, we should be sitting there taking the piss, right? That's what I'm saying in the first instance, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and there
Yes,
was, yeah,
absolutely,
it
yeah.
didn't feel like there was enough of that. It felt like people were kind of. I think the problem was that people had sort of sided with Tan over his, attacking Islam, and therefore they sort of saw him on sort of Team A, and then people on Team A kind of stood with him, but then felt a little bit embarrassed and didn't know what to do when he was spitting all this stuff, and then they kind of
Yeah.
went on the sort of free speech. Oh, it's free speech, and to my mind, it was like it was above and beyond free speech. I mean, yeah, okay, it's Speaker's Corner, so you can do it, but people could have at least like hassled him about it, but they just sort of didn't, and I think that made it
Mm.
worse. If people, if Team A had said we don't agree with that, because later on that happened, right? Later on, you got the Danny Tomos and the James Goddards were saying we don't agree with this language that Tan's using. I mean, I think it was Danny Tomo said he had a private word with him afterwards and said something like, "What the fuck? You've just made us look stupid." I don't know if you saw that, Steve.
But then, and that to me raises the whole issue of, are we there as individuals? Are we there of collective groups representing one another? I'm sure Tan, we all know Tan was not there as part of any group. He was there representing no one other than himself.
Oh yeah, definitely,
So
definitely.
therefore, yeah, if you're there as a part of a collective group, then the concept that you were just describing of pulling someone aside and saying, "Hang on a minute, mate, you're not making us look good," is relevant. But if you're not there as part of a group, is it relevant?
Well, it's only relevant in the sense that I think people felt that Tan was on their side in a certain way, and so they sort of defended him. But then when he crossed the line, they were like, "Oh my God, you just dropped us right in it now." So I don't know. To me, it just was totally divisive, the whole thing. And had we have to my mind, Steve should have just walked him out. Like the moment he started spitting the racist stuff, I'd have just said, "Okay, just walk out," because it's not
On
necessary.
on which on which front the Nation of Islam should never be allowed into Speaker's Corner?
It,
Because I'm sure you'd agree, if you're enforcing one principle, you have to be
yeah, it has to
consistent
be
in the
consistent.
enforcement of that
Yeah,
principle.
totally agree.
And I don't know if you've ever stood and listened to the Nation of Islam, but I can assure you they are as virulently racist as Tan has ever been,
Yep, very racist, and I agree with that.
and
So,
quite frankly, not the only ones.
yep, no, if people are spitting bile, particularly like attacking people personally, and the fact that Steve doesn't have the manpower as well, then just walk them out. So, and say, well, we're not going to tolerate that. It's not very pleasant. And I understand you've got this free speech thing going on, but I just don't see it. It's not conducive to like decent conversation, and it creates it creates a divide, a sort of an us and them kind of divide between those that are not being insulted and those that are.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, the question's just being asked, can we provide anywhere they have said, I think he means anyone that has said anything as racist as Tan? Can we just clarify what is the racism that Tan has expressed? What are his racist views in terms of treatment of specific races
Well, didn't
that are
he called, but
discriminatory?
he did call, I realise this is after the fact, but he did call Jedi a nigger, and he called him a monkey, I think, at
Okay.
the tea hut. And that to me is totally unacceptable.
Calling an individual that, I would agree.
It's
So if that
if
happened,
it was
I would
descriptive,
agree with that.
it's okay. But if you're going to use racial slurs like that to a person, that's not acceptable. I think you should be walked out at that point. And there were people round him, okay, for want of a better term, white folks, and they were kind of defending him, and they weren't attacking his use of that language against Jedi, and that made it partisan. Anyway, look, we've gone off track a bit here, but I just wanted to, say
Yeah,
my
it's all relevant.
yeah, I wanted to say my piece on that. I know we're not on the same page on most of that, but some of it we are. So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the court case that?
The Redmond Bait case, yes. So, um, now, my understanding, in summary of it, that it all started when I believe two Christian preachers were standing on a high street somewhere preaching, and someone complained about what they said. And initially, it went to court, and they were found guilty. I'm not sure precisely what the precise charge was, but it was subsequently appealed, and the appeal is the sort of final conclusion. where the judge made some very interesting comments. So I'll just read you a quick quote from the judge and then sort of talk about, so what does that mean and what does that mean in Speaker's Corner. So basically, the short, it's not very long, I'll just quickly read it. Freedom of speech includes not only the inoffensive, but the irritating, the contentious, the eccentric, the heretical, the unwelcome, and the provocative, provided it does not intend to provoke violence. Freedom only to speak inoffensively is not worth having. So basically, what this absolute leading court case, which has continued to be the leading light on this subject, is that there is no legal protection against offence. You have no legal protection or entitlement not to be offended. PC Steve Barnes brought this piece of legislation up yesterday, or piece of case law up yesterday, because it is still highly relevant. And he made the point there's no legal protection against being offended, but of course everyone has the legal entitlement to walk away from any situation within which they are being offended or think there is likelihood of them being offended. And it's probably just useful to point out that the point in the meeting and the discussion yesterday when Steve Barnes brought this legal case up, it was in response to a specific question that came from someone in the meeting around, is it illegal for someone to say something offensive about someone's prophet? And I think that the precise quote that was cited, that is it legal for someone to say fuck Muhammad? Because we know there was a circumstance only on Sunday, just past, where someone said that in angry response to another individual and then was assaulted. Had some liquid thrown in their face, for which that individual was at least asked to leave the park on Sunday. So a very recent example of that, that Steve made abundantly clear. No, that in itself is not legally enforceable, to prevent someone saying something of that nature.
I mean, I understand that, and of course that is the law, but it's not desirable to just to stand back and say abuse is okay in a public space. Speaker's Corner is different in that sense. So if somebody is in a public space, like in the street, yelling the N-word, that's not desirable. There are children walking around, all sorts of people are just not aware that could be said, right? Even though that is the law, people are not aware.
But as you say, in our context, we're talking about Speaker's Corner. Although that court case was not in regard to Speaker's Corner, it was just a communal garden, town's
Well, this
high
is
street.
it is legal, but I don't think it's desirable. I mean, in a private space, Steve, I'd say absolutely. Even if it's the example I give is a seminar, like that Austrian woman was hassled for the seminar. She got taken to court and she lost for her statements about paedophilia in Islam, Muhammad, and so forth. In a public space where there's a warning, whatever. In a private seminar, maybe it's open to the public, but there's a warning that this is going to be offensive. I'm fine with that. Going on the street and just yelling it out, I'm not fine with, and I think people should be moved on. But Speaker's Corner is different. I grant you that it's different.
And I think a very important point has just been made by Dwayne Dibley in the chat. And I know our friend Rob of the Gin and Tonic Show, who are on another neighbouring channel as we speak, often makes this point. Offence is taken, it is not given. Individuals make a conscious choice whether something offends them or not. I can never decide whether what comes out of my mouth offends you or not. It is within your absolutely psychological control to decide whether you choose to be offended by what has just come out of my mouth or not. And I think that's often, we forget about this personal responsibility that people have across humankind. And you have a personal responsibility to make your own decisions, to control your reactions, to control your behaviour. And you cannot blame me because you have chosen to react to something that I have said, words that I've chosen to come out my mouth. You have to take that personal responsibility to decide how you choose to respond.
Well,
And a defense.
Sorry, go ahead.
And a defense is not, you just said something highly offensive to my ideology, and my ideology is incredibly important to me. So therefore, if you say X, I am going to punch you in the mouth. I am going to throw my drink over you. No, that is not the society we are living in. We're living in a society where personal responsibility has to take priority.
Right, but the responsibility is on both parties, right? It's on the responsibility for you not to be, deliberately offensive. It's the same thing.
But even if I'm deliberately offensive,
I've known you for a while, and I don't believe you would say these things. I think you.
But even if I were to, because what is comical.
But would
is
you
that,
judge someone, Steve, if somebody did that? You would surely judge them as a bad person. If someone went up to someone and racially abused them in the public place verbally, you would be disgusted as much as I would you not?
Yes, of course. If someone goes up to a complete stranger in the high street and then says something that's highly offensive, that's not, they're not filming it for some Channel 5 troll show or whatever. If there's not some other purpose to it that I can see and understand, if they're just doing it randomly to cause offence and upset, then that's not a moral thing to do. And it's not something I could do.
So I'm saying there is a responsibility on the person giving saying the things, and I agree with you that the person should not. It's words. They shouldn't react. They can react verbally. They can give it back, but it's not always easy. Like if there's children there or something like that. This is,
But when
you bring your son to the corner, I'm always aware that he's there. It worries me. In case somebody is, because you're a celebrity. People come up to you all the time, and I think if somebody starts hurling abuse at you, he's standing right there. That does concern me.
Oh yes. But his presence, believe me, has not limited.
It's not
the way in which some people behave. No. It's not limited how others respond to me and the language that they use to me. But what I was going to say is, I do find it. Well, I'm not sure whether hilarious is the right word to choose, really, but the community that we're talking about here is the Islamic community, who seems to so readily take offence and react so harshly and violently to their offence that they choose to take, are also the people that, at an absolute drop of a hat, are the first ones to turn around and say the most virulent, nasty, evil, malicious stuff to you in order to wind you up. And we've all heard it, because we know their chosen line of attack often involves having sexual intercourse with our mothers. It does seem to be a very chosen line that they take. Now, we know they're doing that because, in their culture, to criticise someone's mother, is the worst offence, after slating the prophet, I guess.
Yeah. I don't.
But they reel this off repeatedly and regularly and frequently, without a whim, without a hesitation, and even though, you could say in any culture saying stuff like that's quite offensive, I would never react one jot, and have never reacted, because believe me, it's happened many, many, many occasions, because it's childish, illogical. It has no, you've never met my mother, you don't even know whether I have a mother, whether she's alive. Why would I ever take offence of someone saying something gratuitously unpleasant about my mother? To me, it would be a very weak-willed and ridiculous, not to mention daft thing to do, to react in any emotional way to someone saying something like some nonsense like that to my face. But it's what they use. It's the childish, pathetic method of attack that they will frequently use, particularly after they think you've just said something that's offensive to their delicate, weak little religion.
Yeah, well, there's a few things to say about that. I mean, most of the Muslims at the corner don't do that kind of thing, right? It's only a small handful of people.
It's not tiny. We're not talking about a tiny number of people that you could count on one hand. I'm sorry, what I just described is a frequent. Yes, there are many there that wouldn't ever do that. Absolutely.
The main celebrity characters.
No, I'd even say some of the main celebrity characters have behaved in such way in the past.
Modine certainly has. We can.
Well, yes, as a good example, but I was thinking of some of the others. I mean, I think some of them have grown up somewhat, and I think have learned not to behave in that way. But you know, I can remember some of the notables doing that in the past. And the other thing is, so yes, so some of the notables may not be doing it now, but again, do they step in and deal with the others that are doing it now? But my major point, you know, it's not uncommon, it's frequent. There are large numbers of individuals that go to the speaker's corner who regularly use that sort of line of attack.
It's not, and I would, you know, I have to stick by my principles. So if they use that verbally, then I would say I'd walk them out as well, because I don't like that kind of language either. You know, I think that is abusive and attacking a person, and is unnecessary. But in terms of the physical, using physical violence, obviously that's totally unacceptable. But if you say something about their ideology and and their retort is something that is equally offensive, then so be it. If you're going to support free speech, it has to go right across the board, right? But I agree. You know, they can't then. It's a hypocritical to say you can't say something and then they themselves say something. But I don't think the corner's representative of you know, of the country at large. I think it attracts a certain kind of people like you and I.
What does Raj call the group?
The misfits,
not the misfits, yes.
The Addams family or whatever. We are so we're the sort of vocal ones. But anyway, I think we disagree on that. But you know, in terms of the I think that for social cohesion, I would want these people out. But maybe Speaker's Corner is an exception. And Steve is talking about putting signs up, right, to stress that you may be offended.
Well, I mean, we've recently had signs installed that sort of talk about the history and the heckling, etc., etc. I mean, this might sound ridiculous, but quite frankly, you know, I think possibly we should have massive signs at every single entrance saying, you know, do not enter if you're easily offended. You're likely to hear things that may unsettle you.
Well, I'm thinking is also people with children, or maybe they don't. Maybe they expect the law. I mean, I think the example in the meeting was given that it might be somebody from Saudi Arabia that doesn't, you know.
Well, I was going to say on that point, because it was suggested that, oh, you know, the significant proportions of people that are reacting negatively to what they hear are tourists. I don't think that's the case. In fact, occasionally, yes, there has been a tourist from the Middle East who has reacted, and maybe during the summer months when we do get a lot of younger males over from Qatar and Saudi and the Middle East and what have you, you know, maybe there's some of that, but the majority of the negative reactions, or, you know, the taken offence that we see and the physical violence are not from tourists. They're from British-based people.
Yeah, I know.
Who
I
don't think have any excuse to say, "Oh, well, I didn't know what Speaker's Corner was. I just stumbled into it and heard something offensive." No, these are British-based people,
and it is part of the problem, isn't it? That the regulars. It's the regulars that are the problem, and they have beefs that roll over week on week, and it escalates, and then the violence starts. I agree with that. I don't think it's visitors at all, but I do think the signs would be good in the sense that people with children, for example, might see. I mean, it looks very bad going through, and people are yelling out racial like slurs, and you're walking through with your kids. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what kind of country are we in right now? You know, and there's a policeman standing there, you know, when they're doing it. It's like, oh, this is a bit peculiar. So maybe a sign or two would be helpful to let people know.
I mean, even though I am a parent, I am not someone that thinks parenting should involve cotton wool, which is, you know, one of the reasons that, as you know, I've taken my own son there. You know, I don't want to wrap any child up of mine. I want them to be exposed to the rawness of life.
Yeah, I was worse than you. I had a no censorship policy, so they pretty much run amok. But they got bored with it. And it worked. You know, it was like you can swear. When they found out they could swear, it was like it doesn't matter. I think we had 2 days of F's and C's, and then it just stopped. They were like literally they were going fuckety fuck all around the house, and then they just got bored. So it worked, but still, you know, there's a difference between that and actually prescribing like a racial slur to someone is a little bit different. But anyway, let's move on with the other stuff because we're getting bogged down in that. So what's the next thing we want to talk about? Did you recall the crime stats? Because I didn't.
Yes, I did. In fact, I haven't mentioned yet, but yeah, the reason I was taking notes is because I've written a little article that I've just published earlier.
Brilliant.
which is on medium.com. So if you go to medium.com, which is just a website where people can blog and write stuff, I've put numerous articles up there. So it's under me, Steve Speaker's Corner. So I just put one up earlier, which was just like a summary of what we talked about last night. So I'm just going to go through that. So we talked about TAM. Collective prayer, do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, go for it. Let's talk about collective prayer.
So, I think people in the meeting, including Steve Barnes, acknowledge that people have been praying in and around Speaker's Corner for a long time, for donkey's years. It's not a completely new thing. But what did change, sort of earlier, well, probably over the last couple of years, I would say, is that the numbers of people praying increased significantly. The precise site where they're praying changed. It moved right into the thick of the area that's now used for Speaker's Corner. It wasn't being done at a distance. And then prayer mats were being laid out, and then laid out for the full day. So they're basically marking their prayer territory out for the entire day. When people came near it, that started to cause problems. There's certainly one instance of that on video when Tan, I have to say, very quietly and wasn't creating any commotion at all, just wandered over and stood sort of a few feet in front of the area that they were praying that day, and that created a bit of commotion. And then the call to prayer started. And that absolutely only started, I think, probably at the beginning of 2018, where, again, that was done right in the middle of Speaker's Corner, not at a distance, right adjacent to other speakers. And, that was confirmed by one of the men's rights activist guys last week. So a steady sort of a stealth of an increase of prayer and collective prayer. So basically, they told us last night that that the legalities of this whole situation has been checked out and defined as appropriate and legally compliant, etc. And that we all know this for many months now, but in case anyone's been hiding in a cupboard, the Royal Parks, who govern Speaker's Corner and all of the central London parks, have a clear published policy that's been in place for a long time, that no collective worship is allowed, applies to anyone of any faith. So the Catholics can't all turn up and have an en masse prayer to Jesus. It's equally applied to everyone, and that they enforce it via now I just want to get this bit right. They enforce it under the illegal assembly regulations.
Yeah, the phrase is unlawful assembly.
Yeah, unlawful assembly.
Collective worship, 2 or more people in collective worship is an unlawful assembly.
Yep. And they're saying that is a statutory piece of regulations that's decided in Parliament. It's not something that anyone could just say, we're going to change that or adapt that. It would have to go back to Parliament, and it would have to be a new act or an amendment to the act. But the police said it's been a challenging matter to deal with during 2018. And in his words, that they tried to use a common sense approach. That they've asked the Muslim community to stop doing this and to do it outside of the park. And he publicly thanked them that in the main they've responded to this request and they are no longer doing it in the park. Although again, it was acknowledged that it has subsequently happened on occasions. But to be honest, when that is done, and I'm sure there's someone in the chat that's probably got to say something about this, because I think he was quite involved in getting it to happen one time. But it was acknowledged by the meeting last night and the police that the fewer times that it has happened in recent times is much been sort of organised as a protest. But the police were clear, and I hope the individual in the chat will listen for the next few seconds. The police were clear that if that continues and if there are repeat offenders, then they will use the same rules and the same legislation that they're using for other misbehaviour in the park, and warnings will be issued, and people may subsequently be excluded from the park if they continually repeat the request not to collectively pray in the park. So it's not victimisation against Muslims, because it's applying to absolutely everyone. The point was made in the meeting there are actually 10 mosques within less than 1 mile radius. And I made the point in the meeting, they couldn't actually answer my question, but Hyde Park is a huge, huge park. There is lots and lots of space, both grassed space and tarmacked pathways. The reason this became a problem, as I described a minute ago, is that they started doing it in big numbers with prayer mats right bang in the middle of the area that's used to Speaker's Corner. Not up the pathway to the left, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, right slap bang in Speaker's Corner. That's why it became a problem. They made it a problem by enforcing it right in the middle of Speaker's Corner. Surely on all fronts that's just bad manners. And that is why people reacted, because I know a lot of people said, oh, we've been doing it for years, why have the troublemakers, why have the Islamophobes suddenly made it an issue? They made it an issue by doing it in large numbers, loudly with the call to prayer, with their permanent prayer mats laid out, slap bang in the middle of Speaker's Corner.
I think,
even though Speaker's Corner is just one little corner of a huge, huge park.
It was established, wasn't it, that there was an aspect of protest to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but in fairness, just to counter some of what you said there, Steve, they were saying that the human rights laws do conflict with the unlawful assembly rules to a degree, and that's why they hadn't or couldn't really enforce it as such, but that they would do their best to negotiate with the Muslim community over this. And what Steve said was that the Muslims had been very receptive and had agreed to take it elsewhere. So Steve was saying that effectively they'd come to a diplomatic kind of negotiation on that one.
Yes, and we've all seen that in the main that has happened, which is why, you know, I agree with Steve for thanking the majority of the Muslim community at Speaker's Corner for taking heed of that request, and they have now conformed and listened and responded positively to that request. It is only some protesting troublemakers, and actually I'm going to name names. It's Black Hat Guy who's in the chat, who, you know, I heard, and he can deny this if I'm incorrect on this, that he played a significant part in instigating a specific public prayer that occurred in the park, I don't know, about a month and a half ago. And I'm not even sure whether that individual is Muslim, quite frankly.
As far as I know, it's Rajiv is the guy in the black hat.
Is that his name?
As far as I know, he's not Muslim, but I may have him on later once we've gone through the whole meeting, and maybe he can counter it. But sorry,
the other specific thing. The other specific thing I'd like to comment on that specific protest a month or so ago, that, as I say, he, as far as I'm aware, was fairly involved in instigating and organising and calling people together. And I think there was a video of him saying this, so, you know, it's not hearsay. It's recorded in perpetuity. That specific prayer that he was involved in himself, he was lined up in one of the rows, was led. Now, before I declare who it was led by, I've often asked, just out of curiosity, Muslims in the past, how do you decide who leads the prayer? And I've always basically been given pretty much the same answer, and the answer being that, you know, whoever present is most knowledgeable, most wise, most learned, most educated in the faith. So that's what I've been told. That's what the decision is based on.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Who can I just go on? Yeah. Who should lead this particular protest prayer but our friend Bilal? Now, I struggle to believe that amongst a group of 40 or so Muslims that Bilal could ever be the person who's the most wise, who's the most educated, who's the most knowledgeable of their faith. And I certainly would like to think that if I was a good practicing Muslim, I would not be getting down on my knees praying behind Bilal leading that prayer, knowing what everyone knows about that one individual. that was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen at Speaker's Corner. Bilal leading a group of 40. In fact, I have been told by Muslims that it was more than 40 people. I know I took a photo of it at the time because I was so shocked and tweeted it. No, but to see a known adherent of ISIS, a known adherent of Anjem Choudhury, and let's not beat around the bush. Those 2 points are fact. Let's not allude that that's hearsay or not correct. We all damn well know it is correct.
I know that it is correct for a fact.
That guy is under 24/7 surveillance of the authorities because of his associations with Anjem Choudhury and that group of Muslims.
But the sorry, go ahead.
But yet, again, I know I'm repeating myself. Yet 40 Muslims plus Black Hat guy were quite happy to kneel down and do their prayer behind a man like that, a boy like that.
So what I want to say, because Paul's jumped off, unfortunately, he's been called away. But
Yeah,
I just want
lost him.
I want to put Paul's point across in the fairness of balance, and he was saying that there is a difference between Christians and Muslims in regard to this. They do have to pray 5 times a day; they're obligated to do so. And he made the point that they are meant to pray together. So if they find themselves together, they are supposed to pray together. And obviously, I'm not a Muslim; I can't confirm or deny this, but that's what Paul said. He said. Oh, Steve, did you put your headset? Getting a lot of echo.
Oh, hang on a minute. I think the headphones just came unplugged. Oh, where's the... Okay, should be better now.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, he was saying that they are obligated to pray 5 times a day, whereas Christians are not, and they are sort of meant to pray together. So it kind of makes sense. But I agree with you. You know, it would be far better on the grass or somewhere else than it would in the.
Or not even on the grass. As I said, Hyde Park is huge.
Yeah,
it's probably what, if not the biggest, one of the biggest parks in central London.
We can't deny it was a protest. There was some form of protest
exactly.
there. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, someone's just said in the room, and actually Saeed made this point in the room yesterday. Oh, you know, maybe not everyone knew him. Yeah, maybe there were 1 or 2 on the sidelines that didn't. Everyone that goes to Speaker's Corner or knows Speaker's Corner or reads about it or watches YouTube videos knows about Bilal. I think we're being a little too cautious and saying maybe they didn't know.
My thing about it is that I think it's like a health and safety issue. You've got cycles going through, people are standing up, being vocal, turn around and fall over someone that just happens to be praying, like right behind you. And then somebody else said there was an issue of being told to step away. So if people were too close, people were saying you got to step away. So it kind of aggravated the whole situation. But yeah, I mean, look, I don't think the praying should be in the main thoroughfare. I think it should be on the grass or somewhere else. I agree with you on that sense. But I just wanted to put Paul's points across since he's not here. So
and I will also say something to sort of back Paul up, and we know Paul has done this before, and actually he suffered gravely because of it. Paul has been the first to speak out against these radical idiots that are now coming to the corner.
Well, I think we're actually going to get to that, what Paul actually said about them, which is well worth commenting on, but we'll do that in a moment. Yeah. What was the next thing on the list that we heard?
Let's go.
I have to say, folks, it was a positive meeting for the most part, but we're probably going to get into some bits where it started to get heated.
So we then, there was some discussion about the concerns of the amount of violence and intimidation. So Steve gave us some stats. So he said for the period 1st of January to the 13th of October, so I guess, this calendar year so far, 40 crimes have been reported specifically relating to Speaker's Corner. So what's that, 9.5 months, 40 crimes in total. And exactly half of those reported crimes, no further action was taken. So 20, nothing happened. There were 9 common assaults, 8 racially aggravated assaults, 3 ABHs, actual bodily harm, and he actually said of those 3 ABHs, 2 were against police officers, i.e. police officers being attacked, 2 online threats, and 1 theft. I'm surprising actually. It's only 1 theft if you consider the
Yeah,
numbers
it's
of people
amazing,
that
isn't
are
it? You think there'd be
going through
pickpockets
it.
galore there, really?
Well, clearly, I guess they're just staying on Oxford Street and not bothering with Speaker's
I was
Corner.
convinced I was being pickpocketed once, and I turned
Oh,
around, and
really?
no, it was one of the fellas at the corner just teasing me. They kept like touching my bag, like they were,
Well, can I just make an amusing side point on that I thought of there? There is an individual who never speaks a word, and he's been going there for as long as I've been going there, so for quite a few years, and if you watch him, it's very clear what he's doing, and I'm surprised he hasn't been reported. But what is it? Frotaging, is that the word? He basically goes and rubs up himself and touches himself
No.
to people when there's large crowds. And clearly, he's a bit of a sad, lonely individual. And he always literally wears the stereotypical dirty rain mac. And jogging bottoms, but often I spot him up there, and if you see a crowd, he'll often be on the outskirts of it, sort of just aimlessly, looking his head around. But if you look where his genitals are,
Oh my God!
Yes.
Now I know. I'm gonna
stand.
I'm gonna stand in front of him just for the fun. Um,
Just for the kick.
Just for the kick. So, just getting serious again.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's my fault. I cracked the joke. So, one of the things they were saying with the police is they will be issuing these ABC.
Yeah.
These ABCs.
So that's what I was going to.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to come on to. And I've read up a bit on those because I didn't necessarily understand what they're about. So, basically, ABCs, which stands for Acceptable Behaviour Contracts. And they said they've started to issue them.
I'm glad you've looked it up because I'm sure Steve said antisocial behaviour contracts.
Well, that's the old. I think ASBs, antisocial behaviour, is what people used to be issued for. Drunkenness on the high street, repeated drunkenness.
ABC.
Exactly.
Yeah, now it's an ABC.
Well, this is a different thing. So basically, an ABC is a voluntary written agreement between a person and the police, whereby the person voluntarily agrees to behave in a certain way or not to behave in a certain way. They usually last for 6 months, and they're not legally binding, but obviously the individual will be monitored and reviewed during this period, and if they repeat the bad behaviour, or if they breach their ABC, then that will be used as evidence to then take court action that could involve more serious things, including exclusion from the park. So I don't know if you remember on the drink throwing incident that happened, was it last Sunday or was it the Sunday before now, with Sophia and Mo Dean. I believe that's what Mo Dean was issued. So he voluntarily agreed to accept an acceptable behaviour contract, which basically, whatever period that lasts, if he behaves himself, it'll be fine and it'll expire and nothing else will happen.
So, I mean, it's like a stepping stone, isn't it, to prosecution?
Yeah, it's like a disciplinary warning before you're dismissed.
But Steve, can you just tell us about this thing that I found this somewhat confusing? Because Steve said a couple of times, no power of arrest, no use of force about certain things. But then he said we can take the names and addresses of people and serve a summons, effectively. But then the question was asked, well, what if they don't give their name and address because they're not obliged to? What was your understanding of that?
I don't know. I wasn't certain because I think that question applies. It applies to lots of different situations anywhere, doesn't it? And I certainly have read in the past. And I know if you ever go on political protests, and often there are legal advisors there, and they give out little leaflets and contact numbers of solicitors in case you get arrested. I've read those sorts of leaflets before, and generally the advice on those is never give your name and address. Never give your name and address to a policeman. You don't legally have to. They can ask you for it, but you're not legally obliged. So therefore, there must be some scenarios where you are legally obliged to give your ID, but others that not. But I'm not sure.
I think he said under certain conditions they would arrest you, but
not giving your details.
Yeah, under certain conditions if you did certain things, but he wasn't clear. But then
Now, so I mean, I don't know. I'm only guessing, but I would assume because one of these ABCs is voluntary, then to do that, they're going to need your name and details. But one would only assume that if you've misbehaved and they want to give you an ABC and you're refusing to give your details, that's only going to count against you in the sort of the severity of how they treat you, because they're going to be more obliging and less strict if you play the game and give your details than if you don't. But who knows?
Well, I'm glad you've looked it up. I mean, they said that they were going to issue these ABCs to people online that were,
yes,
escalating the tit for tat kind of
yes,
personal attacks,
yes.
Right? And we know they are.
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
Not mentioning any names.
No, of course, no, not at all.
But it sounds like they have to agree to accept these.
But that's what I'm now saying, and this is me not factually knowing, but if they use that voluntary tool but they require someone to give their details, if the person doesn't give their details, would not mean the person gets off scot-free. It would mean that there's a more severe route taken.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Because if you're choosing not to take the voluntary route,
Steve was very wishy-washy on that, wasn't he? He didn't want to commit.
Because these ABCs are only one route of a number of options. They can go for court action. They can go for more legalistic processes. This ABC is just seen as an informal, voluntary thing to try and achieve a positive outcome, basically. But if the person doesn't even play game for that voluntary route, then the alternative should be a more strict, a more legalistic route.
This is the problem. This is why Steve doesn't want to be too specific about this, because if he says we must arrest under those conditions, then of course people will say to the police, "Come on, you've got to arrest. You said you were going to arrest." That's why he does not want to feed this narrative of, well, they've done this and you've got to do this, because that's, this is the whole thing he started at the beginning. He's wasting time with stupid little incidents at Speaker's Corner rather than dealing with real crimes. So he doesn't want to feed us too much information. Now, there was a little thing that Ian raised about an incident with Sophia. I don't know if you want to, did you want to go into that? We can skip over it if you want, because it's going to name names, which is not particularly great.
I think all we should say is that, well, I'd say a few things. Firstly, now I know certain individuals love to throw the term snitch at people. Quite frankly, the word snitch is not a word that's even in my vocabulary, never has been, never will be. If people are misbehaving, if people are threatening people, if people are getting physical, if people potentially are breaking the law, that's why a good chunk of my tax that I pay on my earnings goes to the police, goes to the legal enforcement entities. They are there to deal with people who are physical, who are violent, who are breaking the law. And I always say to anyone, and I know Raj absolutely has this attitude, and I think it's spot on, I will go to the police and report any illegal activity, any violent activity that I suspect whatsoever. And I think that anyone who is the victim or is the is at the centre of receiving such treatment should never think twice, should never hesitate to do anything other than to tell the police. And then the police can decide what they do with the matter, whether they think it does need taking down a legal route or not. But basically, someone observed some individuals saying to themselves that they were going to get someone later because they'd missed their opportunity in the park, because basically they were found out and there was people around that I think clearly they realised would not allow them to do what they wanted to do. So they were basically saying, don't worry, we'll get her later in McDonald's. That individual was then warned. The police have been notified and it's being investigated by the police, because we have to be zero tolerant of thuggery, of violence in the park. That I am zero tolerant on that. We can have discussions till the cow comes home about the use of words and what words should or shouldn't be used. But when it comes to physical violence, I am absolutely zero tolerant. Whether it's Moses reacting to week after week of baiting, whether it's Omar Ratboy being punched in the face because he's just been screaming someone's paedophile, any scenario of violence is wrong. And we should go straight to the police. And it wasn't the potential victim that went to the police in the situation that we were just referring to. It was other individuals that witnessed the potential culprits planning their attack before anyone wants to victimize the potential victim of that situation.
So I think this, well, in my notes anyway, this is the point at which um, Paul was condemning the Chowdhury supporters, and Paul was
Yeah,
very extreme in his rhetoric. He called them lethal, and he said
yeah,
they were very much directly connected to the bridge incidents where people were run over in cars and killed.
yeah.
Yeah, so he was
Well, I mean
very
that's
condemning of that, of them, the people
and
in the
that's
park.
and Yeah, absolutely. And that is because, again, we all know the center of that network is a Mr. Anjem Choudhury. He is the center of the network that resulted in the London Bridge attack, that resulted in the Lee Rigby murder, that these individuals that are coming to Speaker's Corner are part of. That's what Paul meant. And again, I take my hat off to Paul for the position that he has consistently held in regard to these individuals, because he's called them out from day one, despite getting a whole lot of hassle from a lot of other Muslims at Speaker's Corner. So, I absolutely pay him a lot of tribute for what he's done, because it's been a personal cost to him. And it was great to hear him, make that point again yesterday.
Yeah, no, that's good. So can I put you on the spot here?
Yeah,
Why is it not their freedom of speech to express their foul views?
yeah, I thought you might ask that question.
Sorry, mate.
Because it's not a straightforward matter, and it's something that I've thought about a lot. And I wouldn't necessarily say I'm 100% certain of it in my mind. I'm probably 90% certain of it in my mind. That the I am a free speech absolutist with one exception, and that one exception is planning, encouraging violence and murder. Now, that is what Anjem Choudhury did and has done. Which he skated around the edges of legality for a long time, we know, but he slipped up finally, which is why he ended up being in prison. Now, in the past, now I do need to read up on this because I don't know a huge amount of it, but I do know in the past the UK had law for treason. And we don't have laws for treason. They were overturned not that long ago. I don't know whether this is an area you know anything on, James.
Yeah, because you've got two laws, haven't you? You've got sedition, which is where you plot to commit treason, and you've got
Hmm.
treason itself, which is where you actually carry out the act.
Yes. And am I correct in saying that the law was changed a while ago, that they were removed as offences?
I think there was
Or something
changes.
happened
Well,
to lessen
certainly
the...
you used to be able to get the capital punishment for treason, and that was left on the statutes. And I have a sneaky suspicion that it was, in fact, the Blair government that removed the capital
Yes.
punishment rule about treason. But I wouldn't swear
Yeah.
to it, but I think we'll come back on that one, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not just make known. I'm not arguing for capital punishment in any way, shape, or form. It's just whether the crime, whether the crime of treason exists.
That's
And
another live stream.
That's another live stream.
Another live stream.
But to me, and we must educate ourselves on this. And what was behind the late Tony Blair's government making that change? Something must have instigated it. But to me, plotting and planning for the violent overthrow of the state is pretty damn serious crime. And again,
Well,
is something...
working toward a foreign power, overthrowing
Mhm.
your government is also the issue. If you're assisting in a
Yes,
foreign power, which
yes,
is an enemy of
yes.
your government, then you are, committing a seditious
Yeah.
act.
So I therefore, when I class myself as a free speech absolutist, I guess I'm not being correct, because I've just named two exceptions to that.
So
I
what
think they
you're
would...
so what you're basically saying is that Anjem Choudhury, you're happy with the fact that he is banned
Yes,
from speaking to the media, except and so forth. But
yes,
I'm going to put you on
yes.
the spot again. Sorry, buddy.
That's all right.
What has Bilal and Suleiman said that you feel it falls into this category of sedition?
Okay, so um, there is a slightly bigger group than this, where it might be a lot bigger than I even know about it. But the aspects of it that I'm aware of, there's Bilal, there's Suleiman, there's Ricardo McFarlane. Sorry, I forget what he's chosen to change his name
And there's
to.
Abdul Hakim, isn't there?
Abdul Hakim, that's it. I'm sure someone will make some comment about Simon now in the chat because I've just used another name. And then there's a fourth individual who is called Mohammed Shamsuddin or something along those lines. Those four, well, three of those four, so the three excluding Bilal, there is photographic evidence of the other three being with Amjad Chowdhury in some of his street protests, when waving their various placards at different things that they've done. So three of them, Shamsuddin, Suleiman and McFarlane, have all been witnessed hand in hand, side by side with Chowdhury. They were active parts of his groups that obviously kept reforming, kept renaming when the state kept on prescribing them and weren't very quick to cotton on that they were just reforming under another name. They finally did cotton on and they banned them rejoining, reforming under any title. I don't really know why it took the state so long, but eventually they got around to doing that. So there is no hesitation that those three were active adherents and members of his various extremist outfits. Bilal is slightly different to those because I think he's only 19 years old. He's a revert. I think he only reverted, as they say, a year or two ago, which quite frankly is probably since Chowdhury has been in prison. So we cannot say correctly that he was actively part and side by side with Chowdhury prior to Chowdhury being imprisoned. However, he clearly has associated himself with those other three that were. And as I say, those other three, including Shamsuddin, have all been to Speaker's Corner. Shamsuddin only came there once or twice, but there's quite hilarious live stream video of me talking to him at one point. But he seems to have laid low since that point. So, in my mind, there is no doubt. There is no doubt that these individuals, and this is Paul's strong and clear position, and let's face it, he's slightly closer to things than the likes of you or I. That there is really no doubt that these individuals side with Amjad Chowdhury, share his views, seek and desire actively for Sharia to take over Britain, for the flag to be flying from Buckingham Palace, all the nonsense that Chowdhury used to reel out.
So you're saying basically because they are connected to this individual and because people feel
and share the same ideology,
then they should not be allowed to speak. Is that your position?
These individuals are all under 24/7 surveillance. Right. They are in, we've been told in the past the different numbers of extremists that are under surveillance and are under watch lists, and they are in the most serious, severe group of those people. That is why I think, to a certain extent, they're allowed to walk the streets, and because they're under that surveillance. That's a whole nother live stream about is it the tip orders and the methodologies that we use to monitor or imprison people that are of serious concern to the state. That's a whole nother subject. But these people are under heavy surveillance because of the risks considered attached to them. I am very uncomfortable about said individuals trotting along to Speaker's Corner, grinning and smiling on YouTube, which is on film, which immediately goes around the globe, knowing the beliefs and ideology and the thoughts and the intentions that they choose to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of stuck.
Because let's not beat around the bush. They are the enemy. And I really don't think that's an over-dramatic thing to say. They are treasonous.
Right, but the police themselves are not acting against them. So is it not for the sort of police to decide? I mean, I guess you are saying it's the police to decide.
Well, when you say the
Yeah.
police, do you mean the authorities, MI5, MI6, the security services,
Yeah, they decide whether or not
counter-terrorism?
they should be allowed to.
They do. I mean, again, we're probably going off on a bit of a tangent here, but there's another whole discussion around why the hell was Andrew Chowdhury allowed to walk the streets? Why was Andrew Chowdhury allowed to walk the TV studios for so long?
Sure.
Before, and there's conspiracies abound on that subject, as well as just sort of general
on a personal note, you don't feel that they have actually they've not expressed anything that you felt was beyond the pale at the corner.
You can see in their faces and in their eyes and what they say, they're very conscious of being monitored, and they are trying very hard to not say too much that they're literally rounded up and thrown in Belmarsh, but also saying enough. Hence why we had the ridiculous situation of when they got the black flag out, which and that, I think that's the other bizarre thing, and I think this actually applies to Chowdhury himself. They are fame hungry as well. And that's it is bizarre that it took 3 months for video footage of that flag. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
when I say the flag moment.
Yeah.
It took, and I remember Paul came over to me and told me about it because I didn't actually witness it. But then I went over there and spoke to Suleiman about it. It took 3 months for a video of that to come out, which was a bit bizarre. I don't know who took that footage and why it took so long and what the scenario was around it coming out when it did come out. But it happened, and to me, that's an aspect of A, they wanting to show what their core beliefs are, B, being silly little kids that are wanting a bit of drama and want a bit of fame and want a bit of infamy. And I'm sure the Sun did a very small bit on the two of them coming to Speaker's Corner. I'm damn certain they absolutely relished in that moment. That their faces were in the Sun newspaper.
Yeah, I mean,
they would have loved that.
I've got some sort of a little bit of personal experience talking to Bilal, and he was quite, he was quite keen to express his connection to Chowdhury. But I've never heard them say anything particularly offensive. But then I've not been listening to everything or watching the videos. And
no, of course, they're not going to come to Speaker's Corner and say, "I want to behead Theresa May," are they? Because that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, my concern is that, quite frankly, they are useful idiots to Andrew Chowdhury and the likes of Andrew Chowdhury, and that the coward that he is, uses these numpties as foot soldiers.
But you watch these things more than I do. I mean, generally, what I've seen is that Muslims are against them.
In terms of examples like Paul Williams, absolutely.
Well, Ali Dawa, for example, argued.
And all credit.
Ali Dawa.
Ali Dawa has, but you might tell me I'm being a bit unfair, but I have a bit of a feeling that, just taking Ali Dawa as an example, that he was a little bit late in the day when he did that. And in fact, I was saying to Ali Dawa repeatedly, particularly, do you remember when Ali Dawa was trying to track down Tommy Robinson, and he was chasing around the country trying to find him, and he eventually found him outside, was it Cambridge Court, one of the courts, and there's various video footage of Ali Dawa trying to confront Tommy Robinson. Around that time, I remember making the very point to Ali Dawa, if only you'd put the same effort into tracking down the ISIS-supporting idiots that are in Britain. And actually, I remember he responded to me at one point. He said, "Oh, Steve, I'm not MI5. I don't know where they are. How am I going to be able to track them down?" To which I think I pointed out, or say, well, a couple of them are coming within feet of you at Speaker's Corner. How about starting off then? After that dialogue, he subsequently did call them out, but as I say, he was a little bit late in the day for my likings when he finally started calling them out. But anyway, give him credit now, he is doing it now, and yeah, there are other people that are doing it now.
Better late than never.
True. If it's sincere,
I don't see, to be honest, when I've seen them, and it's not very often, but they are generally together, and they don't have support. They do join in attacking, people that are saying certain things against Islam, as they should,
Hmm.
and that's different. But when they are standing alone, I don't see them getting a tremendous amount of support. I don't see big
In fact,
gatherings around them.
the other Muslim that I think does deserve credit for calling them out, and now I'm not sure if I can even remember his name. Hussein, the black young guy. Is it Hussein?
Not the tall guy, the fairly big built guy.
Yeah, but not muscly, more bit podgy.
Oh, yeah, Hussein Thomas. Is that the guy you're talking about? Quite tall. Everyone's tall to me. Where's the little hat?
No, he doesn't wear a
No,
hat.
maybe it must be a different chap.
He's often in a purple T-shirt for some reason. That springs to mind. No, it's bad that I can't remember his name, particularly as I was trying to give him some credit. And actually, I've told him, although he was quite pissed off that me of all people were giving him credit. But he certainly has been more vocal and earlier. And I remember, on videos as well, calling out the ISIS numpties.
Now, what Steve Barnes said, is that these individuals are being watched, as you said, and that they will be given the ABC contracts.
He said Anjem Chowdhury and a number of the other people that are being let out of prison, because we've already been told that there's quite a few of them that are coming out over the next months, that they're all being released under very strict licence terms that all include not going anywhere near Speaker's Corner. So Anjem Chowdhury is an example. He is not permitted to come anywhere near Speaker's Corner. Thank goodness. But also on a side, Steve did also say, in terms of these exclusion orders, he said that 4 people are under specific exclusion orders after misbehaviour at Speaker's Corner. Now I think we could guess a couple of their names just from knowing what's gone on. But he said, if you think back, there are faces that are now not there, that were there in the past, that were troublemakers.
So you don't think these guys? He wasn't referring to the guys we're talking about.
No, because there's more. These guys that are coming out of prison, there's a lot more than 4 of them.
Sure. No, I just thought the implication was that those guys would be. I thought that was what he was saying, that they would be these.
No, it's they're not under exclusion orders in terms of the same legislation. They're out from prison under licence and have many conditions.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking in terms of the ABC contracts, the antisocial stuff. I felt sure Steve was implying that it would go to these chaps and they were being watched, because I'm sure that's what was
No, I think it's fair to say that Anjem Chowdhury wouldn't be going through a voluntary, non-legally binding.
Not Anjem. I'm talking about Bilal and Suleiman.
Oh, those ones. Well, we can all see Bilal and Suleiman have certainly not been excluded because they're still regularly attending.
Well, not excluded, but under contracts not to, maybe to behave differently.
I don't know, but Ricardo McFarlane has been excluded from the corner, I'm told.
Right.
In fact, it was Bilal himself that told me that information.
So we'll have to apologise to some individuals now, because I was under that impression, and they were quite pleased that had happened. And in fact, it looks like I've got it wrong. You're saying that is not the case, so I obviously misheard that.
Yeah, I mean, I heard rumours that Bilal and Suleiman had been excluded or given warnings or whatever. I mean, maybe they have been given ABCs. I don't know, but they've clearly not been excluded.
Okay, so Paul, moving on a little bit, Paul raised the point, and this is where it got a bit heated, that there was an anti-Islamic narrative at the corner. You're not the best person to ask about that, are you?
I don't know what to say in response to that.
You heathen, you bloody Islamophobe. Yeah.
I will say something, as you'd expect me to.
Yeah, say something. Go on, go ahead. Be controversial, as Raj would say.
Yes. Now, I know Paul would respond to this and say something different, but it goes back to free speech. It goes back to no legal entitlement not to be offended. And remembering that Steve Barnes was detailing that piece of case law in response to the very specific question from a Muslim in the room, is it legal for someone to say fuck Muhammad? In my mind, it's clear that you can go and criticise any belief, any thought, any ideology, any political stance as much as you want, and you'll be fine, except for one ideology, and that is the ideology of Islam, which has different practices whereby you cannot challenge it, you cannot argue against it, you cannot ridicule it, you cannot insult it, because they will react very badly. And I know,
Well,
because
you certainly can criticise, but there are certain key issues of offence which I accept are,
but just talking for myself and how what I say to people and the way I behave towards people at Speaker's Corner. And what I was going to say is, because some of these people have only been coming in recent years, and the whole videoing and filming of stuff at Speaker's Corner has only been going on over the last recent years. I have been going for 18 years, and throughout that time, and even today, I will harangue, let's use the word harangue, people of different views and different ideologies and different politics as strongly as I do Islam. And in terms of, I'm still doing it today. I've done it frequently to the flat earthers. I've done it to people of Marxist viewpoints down there. This whole obsession that, Steve's an Islamophobe and he only ever picks on Muslims and he only ever has a go at Muslims, it is simply incorrect. It's incorrect today because I'm doing it with other groups, and it's incorrect in the past. And I always give this example, and I think some people are probably fed up with me giving it, but years ago, a lady called Diane was a frequent speaker at Speaker's Corner. I think in my 18 years, she's the only woman that's been a regular speaker there. She was rabidly racist. Her core belief was that England was made for white English people, and that God dictates that we should not move around the world and we should not move and live in other places, and that basically international apartheid and every land, every country is made for its own race of people.
Sounds like a charming woman.
Utter bollocks.
Yeah, exactly.
And I used to spend hours arguing with her, and the people that have been going there a long time, remember it well. So again, this concept that they're the poor, vulnerable little Muslims that go to Speaker's Corner, that then turn that into, you're a hate preacher. I'm a white. I mean, Adnan Rashid, and there's a video where Adnan Rashid is talking to Raj, and I'm there, and it's actually on the grass, unusually. And he just, like, in the middle of a conversation, just turns to me and screams at me that I'm a white nationalist, a white supremacist, rather. Now, I would put him in the camp of being one of the more intellectual Muslims. But even someone who I would class as a more intellectual Muslim does not think twice about throwing something like that at someone, simply at someone who challenges their religion and aspects of their religion. It is only this one ideology in the world that I've come across, of all the other ideologies and political views and beliefs and religions, that reacts in this way. And then have the to have the cheek to say, there are people that are being hateful towards us. No, this is what Speaker's Corner is about. It's about tossing around ideas and thoughts and opposing ideas, challenging people, ridiculing people, saying things offensive to what those other people's thoughts and beliefs are. That is what Speaker's Corner is about. If we're going to start limiting that to Muslims, then we limit it to everyone. And then how could you have Speaker's Corner? It simply could not exist if you enforce that law. But this is what they want to do. They want to silence people for challenging them and only them. And in the same breath, they want to challenge Christians. They want to be virulently homophobic, virulently transphobic in the same very breath that they're criticising other people.
But it
is gross hypocrisy.
You feel that is, you say they a lot, so you feel that is the majority of Muslims that are doing that? I mean, at the corner? Because I don't feel it's that way. I feel there's just some individual.
Firstly, I would highlight we are talking about Speaker's Corner. We're not talking about the wider community,
and I don't think it's representative
world,
as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's representative.
No, I don't think it is. Hopefully it's not. So we are only talking about Speaker's Corner. I would say the vast majority of vocal Muslims at Speaker's Corner I would put into this group.
I mean, you are quite a divisive character, aren't you, at times?
Yeah. Not to say every Muslim, because I've had so many conversations with Muslims, the quiet ones in the background, on the side, standing just listening, who sometimes actively come up to me, or other times I just start a conversation with them, who are, as I am, shocked and offended by what they hear, and how they see these loud vocal Muslims behaving at Speaker's Corner. So they're not everyone at Speaker's Corner, but they are the significant majority, because Paul might be one exception, one notable exception, but can we, amongst the two of us now, name any notable vocal Muslims that never use the phrase hate preacher, that never use the phrase Islamophobe, that never use the phrase white supremacist? Have any of them never done that? Ali Dawa, Mo Hijab, any of them? Have any of them not used those terms?
I've not watched enough of their videos to say. I've never heard them. I don't think I've ever heard them saying it, but clearly you are saying you have heard them all saying it.
I would say it is their general narrative.
I mean, we're talking about Hashim, we're talking about Hamza, we're talking about Mansour, we're talking about Shamsi. You're saying all of these, Adnan Rashid, Hijab.
I'm not sure about. I'm genuinely not sure about Shamsi. He may be another notable exception, but then obviously you've got the Shia-Sunni distinction there as well. Whether that's part of it.
I mean, I talk to two people that don't appear on camera, another Hamza and another Isa. And I've never heard anything.
But that's what I'm saying.
Anything out of their lips, except respect and consideration.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I've had numerous conversations with people on the sidelines, at the side, speaking at the back of the crowd. So I'm standing at the back of the crowd. The non-vocal ones, absolutely. I mean, so many times, and I'm so being genuine and serious in saying this. They are ashamed to the core of some of the stuff that comes out the vocal Muslims' mouths at Speaker's Corner.
I mean, when Tan was surrounded by police officers, there were Muslims trying to, sort out the young ones that were saying silly things and going crazy and saying, "Come away. This is, this is not how you should behave."
Yeah, and on that
they should
point,
be given credit, right? Is what I'm saying for
Oh, absolutely. Because again, I have heard Muslims in regard to Tan frequently and repeatedly saying, "Don't pay him attention. Just don't go over to him. Don't listen to him. Don't give him any oxygen."
I mean, the thing is,
of course, is perfect advice. If you think someone's causing trouble and saying evil, horrible crap, just don't give them any publicity whatsoever. But they didn't. They used to swarm round him like flies. Again, illogical.
Well, I think,
to behave.
I think there's a kind of a car crash, mentality. Oh, let's go look at the car crash. So I think you're going to get a big group, but generally speaking, it's like one or two that will be very vocal, and the rest are just watching in the same way that I'm watching this stuff. So, but you've got. I mean, you heckle them quite severely. I passed you once. I passed you once when you were saying to a chap, he may have been Muhammad Ali. Sorry, and I think you said, "Are you a chick with a dick?" Is what you actually said to him. And I mean,
and who was this to?
I think it might have been. Is it Muhammad Ali? Is that what they call him, or is it Ali? Something?
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Yeah,
I know the one you mean.
You were being severely abusive. But I wonder whether or not when they yell this stuff out, that it is just heckling you in return. Is that not?
But I would say there I'm using not hugely dissimilar tactics to what Tan uses, because I vaguely recollect using some similar terminology to that individual, because that individual is virulently homophobic and says the most vile homophobic stuff, despite the fact that in my view he's quite feminine.
Right. So you were retaliating.
So I was retaliating and baiting him by basically calling him something that I know he's virulently hateful towards.
There was one. There's another thing that I wanted to ask you, which was it's totally sidelining this. Steve said that when the mob instances occurred at the corner, that they were outsiders. Do you remember me saying this? They were mostly outsiders. I don't agree. I've looked at the video. I recognise all these people. What did you? And
I'm not sure if I do. And do you recollect? I remember the moment when the attack moved on to Raj. And I remember Raj saying that, looking out in the crowd, there were faces in the middle of the mob the faces that he recognised, and actually he said he was quite shocked at some of their faces because some and who were baying along with the mob, because he said there were a number of individuals who he thought were quite decent, reasonable, moderate, good people. And I think that's an interesting sort of psychological thing, because I think it is a sort of aspect of human psychology that it can be possible for people to be whipped up in the mob, when normally they'd be very decent, calm, reasonable members of society. However, in certain moments, they can be carried along and become part of the mob and become active parts of that mob.
Sure.
Because I think I probably agree with you that I guess in those mob instances we're thinking about, they're not all newbies, and most of them are regular.
They might be new
faces.
to Steve, but I don't think they were new to us. I mean,
or unless he was talking about other situations when there's been.
I'm sure he said the bus incident.
Like when
the bus incident.
Oh, did he?
I mean, I was not convinced at all. I sort of recognised everybody, I think.
I mean, I think there have been people that have appeared either around those moments or more recently that I view very suspiciously, and I think they're coming for negative reasons of violence. There has been relatively small but groups of people who appear quite late at night, masked up, faces covered, who, and I think they might be some of the individuals that were witnessed threatening someone, saying that they were going to do something to someone later in McDonald's. And I'm sure, I think they might have all gone from the chat now. They probably got bored with us, but that does happen on all sides. All causes, all groups always do attract a wide church of people. Indeed. And sometimes inclusive of people that, quite frankly, are only there for physical violence.
So
on all sides.
I want to mention that I don't want to go into too much because I know he's going to be embarrassed about it, but COE were praised.
Wasn't that lovely? I think we should.
Well, he was praised. Let's put it that way. He's been there about 2 years, I think he said.
Yes, isn't it amazing? It kind of feels. Well, I know you've not in recent times. You've not been going that long, but to me, it feels he's been going a lot longer than that. But I just wanted to say, because he was a little bit late to the meeting, but the reaction of the room when that guy walked in, I think there was actually a ripple of applause, wasn't there? And it was just such a nice, positive, genuine reaction to him coming. And he got a bit of ribbing about, dealing with the feds and what have you. But it was all done in absolute positive, good feelings and good vibes, and I thought it was a lovely moment.
Yeah, he did say that he was questioned by Steve Barnes, and he did feel that the intellectual discussions had gone down somewhat over his time.
Yeah, no, he gave a very good and accurate sort of description of what's happening there. Where have the intellectuals gone? Where have the intellectual discussions gone? It's all now just childish playground squabbling.
Yeah, now I think we should get onto this thing about what Bob was saying, because there was it's got quite heated when Bob was, at one point Bob said, Bob the Builder, when he said, I will not censor. You'll have to walk me out or arrest me or something, he said. He was quite vocal, wasn't he, about
So I think, from what I remember, that followed when Raj mainly was just talking about the Mo Sophia incident. When what Mo did was in response to Sophia saying "fuck Mohammed" or whatever it was that she said. And Raj did say on behalf of Sophia, I think is in the chat, hi Sophia, was that Sophia had actually said that she wasn't going to say it again. And then I can't remember what was said by Paul or Syed. Something was said, I think. And then Bob made the point, well, I ain't going to be self-censoring, because that's almost what's being sought here.
What does he call himself? A muscular Christian, he says, isn't he? Is that what he calls himself? He was being very muscular there. But on a serious note, he did talk about incidents that occurred outside the corner, attacks on Christians.
Oh yes, and that was quite shocking.
I think we need to go into those because they were disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because again, Paul Williams was kind of presenting on this whole narrative that anyone that criticizes Islam or ridicules Islam is a hate preacher or challenges theologically Islam is a hate preacher. Paul was very much presenting that, you know, Jay Smith, who obviously used to be quite a figurehead of many of the Christian preachers at Speaker's Corner, but has now returned to his home in America, I think. You know, was a hate preacher. And then Bob obviously sort of gave him some background of you know the number of times that Jay Smith had been physically attacked, including stabbed by Muslims at the corner and outside of the corner. You know, I wasn't aware of that. I can't say I'm really surprised about it, thinking about it. But then also Bob went on to give other scenarios of other Christian preachers who've been physically attacked in the park and outside of the
The
park.
worst one was someone being strangled on the floor of a restaurant whilst the strangler shouted Allah Akbar.
Yes,
that was the
absolutely.
worst story that he told.
And I didn't necessarily bring this up at the meeting, but you know, I'm aware of sexual related assaults that have occurred in the corner.
Yes,
particularly
you
to
wrote
female.
an article on it, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, about Christian. Yeah, so Hayton, you know, sort of gave me some quite open and honest
Do you want to just share
details.
a couple of those things with us? The ones that you published publicly?
Yes, I'll have to quickly go into the article to make sure that I only share. Because, you know, she shared more with me than I published. You know, she shared other scenarios that she actually asked, you know, not to be shared.
I'm
so
sure,
I certainly don't want to.
Well, can I just ask you? Can I just ask the question? Were they considerably worse than what you were about to share with us?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
What I went public with were not as severe or as awful or as appalling as those that she shared with me, but asked not to, you know, to keep them to myself.
Did she report these to the police?
I know the police were involved in some, not all.
Okay.
Right, let me just find my article. Sexual Harassment at Speaker's Corner by Steve Speaker's Corner on medium.com. Right, let's just go down.
If you send me your link, Paul, I'll put it in the show notes.
Steve, even
to your, you know, it's your website.
No, it's not my website. It's a public website.
Oh, okay. But if you've got a blog, it's just
so,
like an article.
So I just email them to you? Do you mean?
No, what I was thinking is if they're online,
yes,
I can put the link in the notes of this.
Yeah, I'll do that afterwards.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Right. So I got the article. So basically, I'd heard rumours from sort of other people that you know, Hayton had sort of experienced sort of specific abuse because of her gender at Speaker's Corner. So I sort of reached out to her and asked her if she was happy just to have a chat about it. So, you know, we had quite a long conversation, and, you know, in the large, she was happy for most of it to be published. So, and you know, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She said, you know, some of her other fellow Christians had the same. So, you know, largely it's physical groping. It's just people, you know, inappropriately touching her, but to the extent of sort of grabbing her breasts at Speaker's Corner, kissing and putting their tongue in her ear, you know, grabbing her bum, you know, invariably, you know, in a crowd, in a mob, at Speaker's Corner. And, you know, she said that, you know, and this has been going on for a number of years, but that, you know, over the last year it has got a lot worse. And you know, she said it's happened to other people that she knows, and I guess other people that aren't quite so resilient as her, because I think she certainly must have quite a remarkable resilience to continue to come to the corner despite having suffered treatment like that. But she said, you know, she knows people who have stopped coming because they just couldn't handle that sort of repeated behaviour. And, you know, she said, you know, that she has taken measures, you know, making sure she's not on her own. And even talked about, and, you know, this has actually happened when she's up on a ladder as well. So she said, for example, if she gets on a ladder, she tries to make sure that there are either sort of other fellow Christians sort of standing behind, or that she's up against a fence, to sort of try and create a bit of a barrier so they can't come and do that from all angles. So that's pretty much the extent of it. And also, she did say that she has again gone and spoken to who you might think are the more sensible, intellectual, mature members of the Muslim community who are doing this. And she said that she was quite shocked and disappointed the reaction that they gave her. It was either sort of denial. Well, I think predominantly it was just denial. But no warmth, no empathy, that's awful. I'll do whatever I can to make sure that sort of behaviour, that sort of treatment stops. None of the normal human reaction you'd expect from decent human beings. So that was it. And she said, again, being after dark, although I know she still we all stay there after dark when maybe we shouldn't. But I think, ultimately I said to her, why are you still coming here? And, how do you personally deal with it? And I think, even though clearly everyone knows I wouldn't agree with it, but it is the strength of her faith, and I guess the strength of her commitment to
her conviction,
do what she does. Her conviction, yes.
I was a bit disappointed. I think I may have mentioned at the beginning that they're not going to police at night. They're not going to have CCTV, and they're going to have no lights.
Well, there is CCTV in and around Speaker's Corner.
Not very effective, perhaps. I don't know.
No, and I guess they'd have to be pretty powerful cameras to be of much use after dark, wouldn't they?
Especially if people have got masks, which leads us to the thing that Steve said they do not have the power to remove masks.
Yeah, I was gonna go back to that article. So I did know about this, that generally in normal circumstances the police have no legal power to require anyone to take face coverings off. And again, we did point out in the meeting yesterday, we weren't talking about niqabs or burqas or Muslims or women. We were talking about men masking up, basically.
Yeah.
So the police do not have legal power to do anything about that whatsoever. The only situation where they can is where there is concern that there is
they've got to have a section. Was it a section 60 AA notice in place, and then they can do it?
I was just gonna find where I've said about that. Yes. Where have I put it? Yeah, there it was. Yeah, so section 60 AA that they can issue, but they can only issue that when there's a risk of serious public disorder. So if they really think there's a risk of a serious riot or whatever, in that situation, that they can ask people to take their masks off. But that's quite a high threshold of sort of considered risk. So on a general day at Speaker's Corner, they can't do anything about people covering up their faces.
Yep. So the other thing I've got on my list, one more thing I think, which is the plinths.
Yes.
What do you know about the plinths? Can you explain to the audience where they're going to be installed and what they are?
Yeah. So basically, we're going to have boxes, plinth-like things installed on Sundays for the general public or whoever wants to stand up and speak from. And these plinths are not going to be where we tend to stand and gather now, but they're going to be in the corner that's nearer the road, that's sort of towards Marble Arch, but still within the park. And I think that area traditionally in the past was more the area that people used to speak in anyway. So basically they're going to put these plinths in, and I'm really pleased to hear also that they're going to have painted circles on the ground underneath to encourage that you stand outside of that circle if you're standing listening, because again another problem with all this intimidation and what have you is there's no respect for personal space, and people are right up in people's faces and stabbing fingers and what have you. So plinths in circles. I don't know precisely when they're going to appear, but yeah, they should be appearing sometime over the next couple of months, hopefully.
Do you think you might get up on? Do you think you might get up on them?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Have a bit of a rant.
Yes. I mean, it's a bit of hassle having to bring a ladder, isn't it? Although I do sometimes have one in the boot. But I think because we said what we think one thing that will help to address all of this silly nonsense is that if we just encourage more people to come and speak, if we have a greater diversity of subjects being spoken about. And who was it? It was, oh yes, Ian gave an example of some young lad that he was speaking to at the corner that was there with his parents. And I think, I'd like to think my son at some point would be happy to get up on the ladder and say something that, let's get younger people doing it as well.
Every time I've asked your son whether he wants to do it, he's like, no.
No, a little bit too soon.
Yeah, a little bit too soon.
But I'm trying to.
You're pushing him into it, the next generation of betas coming through,
exactly.
of hecklers.
Yeah, so and what else? Because I made a few notes of other things, because we kind of at the end of the meeting sort of discussed, right, so what's going to change in 2019, what's going to happen, etc. So we talked about the plinths, the circles, and actually as well as these sort of plinths being put in this sort of outer corner bit towards marble art, saying that, generally I think Steve would quite like to encourage more use of that corner. And even if it's the more sensible, intellectual, calm discussions go on in that bit, and then if the same nonsense goes on where we currently stand, then it can continue.
The trouble is, it's so bloody noisy in that section because it's got all the traffic. Yeah, it's constant, and pollution as well. Is worse.
Yeah, we need a bit more horticulture, a bit more planting.
I know Steve loves the ladders and he loves the heckling. I think one of my first questions to Steve was, what does he think of you? And he said, "Oh, I love Steve." He said, "I like the heckling. I like the old school up on the ladder, and then guys like Steve heckling away."
I suppose like we're doing now, you can have very really valuable discussions on the ground, just between small groups or big groups of people. But it is, and I think that's a useful, valid thing to have. But an equally valid, important, good thing is to have someone up on a ladder or on a plinth speaking about a subject that they're knowledgeable on and passionate about, and then a crowd of people listening to them and still heckling them and challenging them. But because Speaker's Corner used to be so much more of that, you used to have a lot more people standing on ladders with crowds around them. Now, on the Muslim front, there's not a single Muslim that does that now.
No, there is. There's
the Nation of Islam.
No, there's the older gentleman.
Oh gosh, yes.
Is it
right.
Osman? Is that his name?
Osman.
Yeah. He comes. I've spoken to him just briefly for 30
you're
seconds.
Right, he does.
Seems like a very nice guy.
Him, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't like the ladders, but I think the tourists do. I think the tourists love the ladders. That's what they come to see.
Why do you not like them? Why do you not
I like the
them?
discussions. I want to just listen to the discussions or get involved in, eye contact discussions, not just have someone talk to me for 40 minutes. Yeah, that's my preference.
It can still be interactive with someone on a ladder, but I guess they're putting themselves up as an expert on something, and therefore.
And you're going to take them down a notch.
Not necessarily.
Well, we were going to have some people on, but no one's coming on because I think they've chickened and run. No, maybe another day.
Yes.
But I think we've sort of come to the 2-hour mark now, so we might as well.
Oh, yes, we have. Time to go and grab a beer.
Yeah, time to end. Steve, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for inviting. And yes,
it was a nice chat. We'll drill into the differences between us at some point on a chat debate, maybe a debate. Get a bit heated, but this was nice because it was just informative and that was good. So, but yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been really good. And
cool, thank you, and everyone have a good night.
Yeah, thanks to the audience. Appreciate you watching, and we'll do it again soon. Good night,
Cheers,
everyone.
James. See ya.